I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Fellas, we have the judge with us, and Tom. I guess we just kind of freewheeled this section. I guess we were chatting about, bears and fellas. Where do you think we should begin this discussion?
I'd kind of like to ask a question of our listeners, because I came upon, I listened to countless podcasts on myriads of things like this all the time. And something odd took place, and that was two separate podcasts, two separate shows completely, two separate people. And the stories dovetailed that as young boys, these boys were hunting in coon hunting in the Daniel Boone National Forest, and proceeded to go up into an area called Scatter Ridge. And in both cases, the great uncle and the grandfather grabbed the kids and said, "Never go in there. You'll never come out." And in fact, the group of dogs who were just barely inside the wood line never came out. And I went to Google Earth, and of course, trying to find a stupid ridge in a vast country like that is near impossible. But I'd like to know if any of our listeners ever heard of Scatter Ridge and know where it's at. I'd like to take a look at it on Google Earth.
Do you know what state it's in?
Well, Daniel Boone National Forest, I thought was Kentucky, or
oh, okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that sounds familiar now.
I could be wrong, but I thought it was Kentucky. But it was a hair-raising account on both guys, and it dovetailed exactly. Nobody goes in there, and nobody that does comes out. I thought, gee, well, let's find it. And I couldn't.
Yeah, if anybody's familiar with that region, get in touch with us and let us know. Maybe there's other people out there listening who have some firsthand information about that.
That would be great. I guess the other thing that we talked about a little earlier was the discussion on this boy who was disappeared from his home, and they found him 400 feet up a cliff, deceased. I have subsequently heard that he was either removed from his home or from his yard. He wasn't on a hike or anything, but someone or thing absconded with him and drug him up this cliff.
Yeah, I saw an article a friend on Facebook recently sent me, and it was about his funeral, and all the information they had on there at that time was that he vanished. He was found, and they said it was an unknown animal attack, that he was found around 400 feet up this steep slope. And I hadn't heard that before, right. Where you mentioned he was taken either from his home or the yard.
Yeah, I heard that just yesterday. Don't know how accurate it is, but that was, and of course it's getting very little press.
Yeah, Tom, have you got any information about that, or?
Yeah, I actually looked at there's an article with some video clips, interviews with the state trooper there, and what I found interesting, was the trooper. The suggestions that he was offering was, number one, extreme vigilance for people in the area. Number two, which I found really interesting, was keep your pet food or livestock food locked up indoors, and don't leave garbage outside. And Will, you and I have talked about this in the past. Those are all tactics or strategies for people that are having these creatures, Bigfoot, on their property. That's number one.
Yeah, if they want to get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly. But it's and what do they have up there in Kentucky? I think they probably have the type 2s.
More than likely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the type 2s are basically like a type 1, except they have canines.
They have the large canines, upper and lower, and they're prone oftentimes to going on all fours, more so than what we have out here in the West Coast.
Yeah, I think they're a little leaner and meaner. And the other thing that I found interesting was, I'll have to go back and double check the article, but I believe that he had canine puncture marks or punctures,
Really?
Yeah. And I think initially it was attributed, or at least the story was, they attributed this to a deranged dog, I believe is the terminology they used. Well, a deranged dog isn't going to drag a 13-year-old kid 400 feet up a mountain or up a cliff.
No, I was just thinking that it's not something that's going to happen.
Right. And if you run into a deranged dog, a 13-year-old kid's pretty, they're going to be resourceful for getting in the house, climbing a tree, maybe whatever. And okay, let's give it the benefit of a doubt. Even if the dog did kill him in the yard, again, we just have to go back to, it's not going to drag him up the side of a mountain 400 feet. It's
my question is, who ever heard of a deranged dog? I mean, I've heard of dogs with rabies.
Right, that's what I was just thinking too.
Mean, but deranged? What, did he have psychiatric care before this thing took place?
Well, yeah, maybe it escaped from the dog whisperer or something. And I don't want to make light of this, because this is an extreme tragedy for the family. If this happened to one of my family, I would just, you'd be beside yourself with grief. Not to mention, you'd want to go out and find whatever this creature was. But yeah, we know for a fact. I should say we know for a fact. Strongly suspect it probably wasn't the work of a dog.
No.
Well, you imagine the
it's not their behavior.
That's why
the family would be. I'm sorry.
Okay.
The family will be insulted with something like that. If someone came to me after my child was killed and said it was a deranged dog, I'd have 1,000 questions.
And that's why I laughed about that, when you're making the joke about the deranged dog, because it's such a ridiculous explanation. Again, because the kid was taken out of the yard or the house. A dog's not going to do that, not going to be capable of doing that, let alone dragging him 400 feet up a very steep slope.
Yeah.
Well, you want to think about the commotion that would create. You would think that, especially if somebody was in the house, we don't know the details if there's other people around, but
or neighbors,
a commotion
or somebody.
Right, exactly. It's going to make a lot of noise. However, a Bigfoot, it would just be, there would be one snap and done.
Snatch and run.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really too bad. I wonder how populous that area was. Anybody know? Was it a neighborhood? Was it rural? Was it more out in the woods?
Did it give a name of the local community, the closest one by chance?
I think they did, but I would have to go back and look at the video. When they interviewed the state trooper, it was nighttime, and I was looking at the background. I mean, there was a house in the background. I was looking to see if it's exactly what I was looking for. Are there other houses in the area? Is it rural, suburban? Is it suburban, or just rural area? I couldn't tell. But again, we go back to the advice, and here's the question I have: the investigators who are doing the incident on this, doing the incident report and investigation, you got to wonder what's going through their head when they see this. If it indeed was canines with a 4-inch separation, that's huge.
It would be nice to know if anybody else showed up other than the state patrol.
I'm trying to see if I can. I thought I saved the article. Let me see if I can. I want to see if there was actually a name to the local community. I wanted to see. You can usually take a look at things like that and see. Well, is there something a little where there are neighbors where people would have seen or heard something like this, or.
Yeah, is there a ravine? Is there water close by? That the typical things that give these Sasquatches a route where they're kind of hidden and they can move through at will, or it's just hard to tell.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, give me just a moment. I'm going to see if I can locate this article.
Yeah, and I think I just found it. So take a look and see what the.
What's the name of the top?
Well, they got the name of the victim, but I really don't want to say it over the air. I mean, that's
no.
Give the family some
absolutely. No,
yeah, a
you
little
don't
bit
want
of privacy. Okay, so a lot of information here, but this is the wrong article. So there you go.
Just don't say Taylor, Mississippi.
Yeah. Well, they have a bunch of these. Let's see. Here we are. It just says Knott County. And,
yeah.
It said, okay, police found young boy 13 dead on a mountainside behind someone's home in the, my apologies for mispronouncing, it's spelled Emmalena, Emmalena County on Montgomery Creek Road Tuesday, according to a statement from the Kentucky State Police. Coroner's report, Wednesday confirmed the child died from suspected injuries associated with an animal attack. Officials haven't confirmed what type of animal attacked the boy. Kentucky State Police said the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife is looking into it as well. Montgomery Creek Road is about, is about 200 miles northeast of Louisville. The nearby Carr Creek State Park boasts of mild wildlife, including turkeys, raccoons, and skunks. So apparently nothing, no large animals in that area.
Yeah, but if they have a state park, it's probably forested.
Right. I went to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, just outside Louisville. And, of course, we spent a fair amount of time in the woods there. And you don't really see, at least in that area, you didn't see a lot of sign of large animals. Pretty much the kind of thing they describe here.
And they do say in this article, he says, the Kentucky State Troopers responded to what they call a canine attack involving a child, in Knott County. They described it as a canine type animal. State Medical Examiner's Office said the cause of death, it's consistent with an animal attack, but they haven't determined the exact type of animal. And then I found this interesting. In addition to that there are also state troopers say people need to remain hypervigilant, especially at night. But there's no immediate threat to the community. So, interesting.
Well, that's another element. Why stay vigilant at night?
Yeah, exactly.
If it were a dog or something, it would be daytime, nighttime, anytime. but to stay vigilant, particularly at night, that's kind of unusual.
I'm surprised they didn't refer to, they didn't blame it on a bear, which is the standard, as you know, suspect. At least that's what they tell everyone. It was a bear attack. They didn't use that here. I find that odd.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. Are there any bears in that part of the country, in that part of Kentucky?
Well, there are in Kentucky. I just looked it up, but I didn't hone in on this particular area. But they said there was a growing population of black bears in Kentucky.
You know, the question is this consistent with bear behavior? I mean, I've never heard of bears dragging somebody 400 feet up a mountain.
No, they'd partially eat them and then cover them up, come back later. That's typically that kind of behavior.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And one person, here I'm going to quote this, one person I thought said several hundred feet, 300 to 400 feet up the hill. You know, it was very steep. You know, it was a pretty good distance, says this person with Kentucky State Police, with this Post 13 in Perry County. So right now, troopers are not able to confirm the type of animal that may have attacked this child.
Too bad we don't have our forensics guy here.
Yeah, it'd be great to have John on the show.
It really would. We'd talk to him about evidence and teeth marks and distance apart. That would be right up his alley.
Yeah, I mean,
well,
if we had those details, though.
That's true. We don't have anything like that at all. It'll be interesting to see if they just let this thing go into the atmosphere. Just let it, no more.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I'm having a little congestion issue here. I think the thing is, they don't know what it is, so they're going to attribute it to the closest thing according to what evidence they have. And it probably won't go much further, to be honest.
I think that is exactly what will happen.
If we were to speculate a little bit, what I'm wondering is, my understanding is the type 3s, if we were to go from a type 2 to a type 3, again, folks, all we're doing is just kind of brainstorming or speculating here. Is this within the range of a type 3? Because I think they're like even more aggressive, aren't they?
Well, actually, we don't have a lot of information on the type 3, so I'm still waiting to get more of that info. But it's within the range of where the type 3s are, but I suspect it's probably the type 2s. They're a little more aggressive. They have the right tools, so to speak, where people could certainly mistake, a canine attack. And I know where some listeners are going to want to jump to conclusions on that one, and I'm not even going to go down that road. But it does fit the type 2s.
Well, and I'm looking at the area where this attack occurred. And, we've actually got a lot of... We've heard a lot of reports from not only Kentucky, but surrounding, definitely West Virginia, Ohio, and I think even in Indiana. I think we've had reports.
Now I'm looking at the Kentucky... where are we at here? It's the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, and they have a map showing black bear ranges and distribution. Knott County is in the resident bear ranges. The core bear ranges are farther south and east in Kentucky. So, but there are Whitley and Bell counties that border Knott County. Oops, excuse me. I'm looking at Knox County, not Knott County. Knott County is not.
That's cool.
Yeah, in Kentucky, it's not in. I'm not seeing it in the range of where bears live. So that's interesting. Now, unless it was misspelled, but I don't think so. Oh no,
But it is.
no, it is
Oh, go
further
ahead.
east. I see Knott County. It's bordered on two sides by Perry and Letcher counties, who are listed as the core bear range. So it is within the range of possibility, but I don't think that it just doesn't sound like black bear behavior, especially in that part of the country. I mean, listeners can tell us, if anybody's familiar with that, and bear behavior in that region, contact us and let us know.
Yeah, it's a tragedy any way you look at it.
It is, and at this point, fellas, we don't know, so it's all speculation unless we get more information. Well, Tom, do we have any questions we want to
We do.
begin with?
Yeah, we have some. Yeah, we have some really good ones. John writes in. He says he's come to understand that Bigfoot can give off a low frequency growl that can disorient its prey, similar to what a tiger can do. And I think he's talking about the infrasound. And he's looking for our opinion. What do we know about this?
Well, it's something we brought up a few other times on other shows, and John, our forensic anthropologist, addressed it. He said that not that much is really known about infrasound. It's a new area of study with scientists. So, could a Sasquatch have and use infrasound? Certainly. Do they? We don't know for sure. I've heard the growls myself. It didn't paralyze me or any of that kind of stuff, but could it with some people? I'm sure it could.
It'd be interesting to get a microphone, to get a recording. You need a special microphone that can go down to subaudible. The basic human hearing range is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Most people can't hear that high, and a lot of people can't hear that low. But when you get below 20, if you get down to 10 hertz or 8 hertz, it would be interesting to get a microphone that can go down that low and record both the tiger and, if at all possible, one of these creatures, and then do tests based on that. You can get the bass woofers that are basically, they're like 15 feet long, but it's a horn that's 15 feet long, but it's folded in, and they have like a immensely huge diaphragm for the woofer and for the voice coil. You could create I would imagine you could create a scenario where you could do tests on subjects and see what the what kind of symptoms it produces.
Yeah, I think the trick would be getting a recording without becoming a sack lunch.
Yes, right?
I was just going to say we just need to get Tom a tape recorder and send him to India.
Absolutely.
Could be a sack lunch either way.
Yeah, he can wander around out there with his microphone trying to get infrasound out of one of those Bengals.
Here, kitty.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right.
Like, thanks a lot, Tom.
Right.
That it's so critical over there that some of the people will wear I'm not being funny, will wear a mask, which is a mask of a human face on the back of their head.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So when they're working in the fields and so forth, if a tiger sneaks up, it looks like they are looking at it. It's a real problem there.
Well, I can tell you from a friend of ours who lives in India, he's English and works there. He said that the tiger population is making a huge comeback, and in some of those communities, the border areas that the tigers live in, it is a real problem.
I'll tell you, if you want to really have a good evening, or our listeners, pick up a book by Jim Corbett. Jim Corbett was a tiger hunter, and he hunted man-eating tigers. They have a whole national park named after him, and his accounts are detailed, and they are just chilling. Fascinating reading. Jim Corbett.
there's actually some YouTube videos out there. There's a couple of excellent ones of a tiger attack where they're actually
on the elephant.
On the elephant, and they're going through tea fields where the people are picking the tea, and it is a stunning. I mean, those tigers are immensely powerful and super fast.
That's an amazing video. That thing comes out of the bush, out of nowhere, and oh gosh, that's quite the video.
You know, we've got a National Geographic film. And it's about tigers, and in one sequence they show from a helicopter. These guys are filming from a helicopter, and the doggone tiger climbs a tree and is trying to get at the helicopter.
Wow. Well, you know, we have, it's kind of like it's not really a zoo, but it's sort of like that. There's an outdoor wildlife sanctuary not too far from where I live, where they have everything out there, and some of the animals are obviously going to be in paddocks. They've got grizzly bears, and they have a lot of African and Indian animals, and one of them that they have is, it's not the Bengal, but it's the Sumatran tiger. And looking at it, even from a distance, yeah, it looks at you with these eyes at the size of teacups and paws the size of dinner plates, and he just stares at you, and it's like, that gives you a little bit of a chill. And he's behind, he's in a cage or an enclosed area. And I used to work with a guy that his older brother is a zoologist and worked at a zoo down somewhere in Texas, and they had created an enclosure, and they're going for this kind of a natural thing where you don't have bars between you and the animals, but you do have separation. And the experts had come in and they said, okay, we have this moat, and it's this huge it's a 30-foot distance between the observers and where the tiger is, and they had a Bengal tiger in there. And this guy that I'm working with, he said, they all knew that this was twice the distance that this tiger could. It was sufficient, I guess. I don't know if it was twice the distance, but they felt it was more than sufficient. The tiger looked at him, leaped across this distance that it couldn't leap across in one bound, and was on top of one of the people who was setting up this zoo, and they had to beat it, and they're hitting it with stun guns and all that kind of stuff. So, I guess the moral of the story is never underestimate what these creatures can do.
Shades of Jurassic Park.
It was exactly what it was.
They've been known to swim 10 miles offshore and attack guys in small boats.
That would be
sure.
Wow. Yeah, that'd be kind of a freaky.
And coincidentally, the Sasquatch can do similar things.
Well, Will, you and I were talking about the other day, Sasquatch going in the water and tipping over a boat full of kids.
Yes.
Who are out there fishing
Teenagers
at night.
Who are fishing, yeah.
Now, how would you like to be in the water? How would you like to be one of those kids where the boat just got flipped over by a Bigfoot? Now you're in the water at night with one of these things.
Well, you could. It's like, when they say, what's the saying from the old movie Aliens? Is in space, no one can hear you scream. In water, no one can see that you crapped yourself.
Guess so. My question is, what kind of flies were they using?
Right.
I think that's a moot question.
That was the first thing that come to my mind. Is were they using nymphs or dries or what?
Well, who knows? Who knows? They're using flies. Maybe they're doing dynamite fishing. And this would be an excellent time to fill the water with a lot of dynamite.
Yeah,
then they got what they deserve.
Well, nobody from that incident, nobody was injured or anything. I don't know if it was just ticked off or, who knows. We don't have any real other information other than there were a lot of footprints around the edge of the small lake, and so we knew for sure that's what had done it.
The darn things are always ticked off, as far as I can tell.
And
sour disposition.
And that's what John said. He said that's actually a very common trait among all primates, that they have a very, very testy, very short tempers. Tom.
Even going up to the human primates.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Especially us.
All right, we have another really good question. Daniel has a question, and I like this one. He says, has anyone ever cast tracks in the same area over the course of years and been able to show how the foot has grown or changed, like maybe a juvenile maturing into an adult over time?
That is a good question. As far as I know, it hasn't been done. There were, of course, we always use Bluff Creek as the example because that was one area that over a decade tracks were found numerous times and lots of tracks. But I think they were all adult except one particular case. And, actually, yes, I have a cast of one of those 13-inch prints, but as far as I know, it wasn't seen again. So we aren't able to track the growth over time, at least from that area.
But I want to comment. I want to say that's a really good question. And if there's ever an opportunity to do that, sort of a test, that'd be really interesting. I think one of the challenges, and I'll ask you, Will, but wouldn't the challenge be tracking an individual, because they're going to migrate, or not migrate, but they're going to move out of their home range to pretty significantly large area.
Yeah, you'd have to be able to track them throughout their range. Now, when we tracked that group in Southwest Washington back in the 80s and 90s, we knew there were 4 individuals. 2 of them were juveniles. However, we never found tracks of the juveniles after that one time. It was always the adults.
Well, the prospect of tracking these things that have such a long stride, move so quickly, can detect very quickly anybody who would be tracking them. You would think that would be a kind of a futile thing. Are people actually successful in tracking them down to the point that they get a visual?
It was next to impossible. I mean, you're not going to just follow a line of tracks and track them that way. It's not the normal way.
No.
What you have to do is you have to determine their range and their movement patterns throughout that range. And then you can, at least I was able to in that particular group, I could predict within a 30-day time frame roughly where they were going to be. And oftentimes I was able to support that because I'd go to those places repeatedly throughout that 30-day period, and I'd say 80% of the time I could find prints with them coming through the area. But we weren't seeing the juvenile tracks, so the juveniles weren't in those places, and I suspect that's where they were foraging or hunting, and that would have been the adults, and the juveniles were, probably in more secure locations away from potential threats. Which by the way, is what we saw in Yakult. They were actually hiding them.
Oh.
Yeah, the juveniles were in a protected location, and it just happened to be where there was a seasonal pond. There was no water there then, but there was dirt, and the prints were in the dirt.
With the, getting off that topic for a moment, with the absolutely terrible problem they're having with feral hogs in Texas and some of these areas, I'm surprised that it hasn't been an attractant to Sasquatch.
It is.
And here's all that.
It is.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Great food source for them.
I wondered the same.
Are you seeing a growth in population with this food source?
That's part of it. Anytime there's an abundant food source, you're going to see a population growth. It always makes me think back to, you guys ever, I'm sure you remember, from the 60s and 70s, the old Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer that they put out for kids. And in one part, they're calling the Bumble in. They said, he likes pork. Ever make you wonder where they got that particular piece of information?
That is funny, yeah.
Especially at the North Pole. Now, why would they?
Right.
Why would they use the sound of a pig to call in the Yeti when they wouldn't be pigs there? How would they come up with that piece of information? I always wondered.
Yeah. Very interesting. As a little kid, you just take stuff for granted. So it's only later on in life you ask questions like that.
I just thought I'd throw that in there, but it is certainly an attractant to them, any kind of a food source, and especially places where it's abundant.
Well, here's a question.
Try this one for size. Now that we're dabbling in the arts, again, I was listening to a story that a person was telling that as a young boy, they had a problem with one of these, and the colloquial name was not booger, it was slewfoot. Now,
I've heard that before.
I picked bluegrass music since 1965, and there was a song called Slewfoot, populated by Jim and Jesse McReynolds.
Mm-hmm.
And the verse is, high on a mountain, tell me what do I see? And they had changed the words. The present modern was bear tracks coming after me. The old one was wolf tracks coming after me. He's big around the middle. He's wide across the rump, making 90 miles an hour, making 30 feet a jump. And this man was saying he was singing that as a boy, and his mother told him, don't ever sing that again. That's not something we refer to around here. And I thought it was amazing because I performed the song 200 times, and to realize it actually had this type of folklore attached to it, I thought that was fascinating.
I think there's plenty of folklore, that have been used in pieces of art and elsewhere with a direct connection to these creatures.
I'm sure of it. Well, anytime the whistling totems, the fact that during the ceremonies there is a mask that is worn that is shows a whistling structure to the mouth, and we know that these things do whistle or mimic birds or owls or those types of things.
Well, native folks certainly.
Absolutely.
But also other areas by non-native folks, where communities, especially in the South and elsewhere, where they don't talk about this stuff openly, but there are references.
Such as?
Tom, you were gonna jump in there?
Well, I was. I now got two questions. Number one, I just was curious. I was thinking about these, Sasquatch going out and catching these feral pigs, and you see those pigs, they're fast and they're very maneuverable.
They're big.
And they're huge. Yeah, well, I don't think they'd be a problem for a Bigfoot. I think you just grab them and that'd be the end of that. But I was curious, Will, do you think they might use tools like stones or large poles or something to throw and kill one or immobilize one of these things?
Sure. If you're in a place where you can kind of lay in wait, so to speak, then that's what you do. But if you're out in the open, and certainly a lot of areas where these things, where pigs are, overrun the areas, where it's open, you could certainly use a large rock or something to do that.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking, out in the open, and thank goodness they don't. As far as we know, Bigfoot does not use, 223s with a night scope.
No.
Hopefully they'll never get to that point.
Yeah, we don't want to see him go there.
No, we'd be in trouble. And then the other question I have is, Tony, if you've performed that song, I think at some point you're going to have to make a recording. We can post it on the website.
Oh, that's easy. I wouldn't make the recording. It's been too many years, but there's so many out there that you can look it up. Jim and Jesse McReynolds, Slewfoot. Boy, you'll get it in 2 seconds.
Awesome.
Good song.
Yeah. All right, so we got another question here, and this is from somebody named Tamik, and Tamik has written us several times. Tamik has a question for the judge, so here we go. Your Honor, Judge Tony, after serving as a judge for your career, did you have to develop skills in which you're fairly good at determining if somebody is telling the truth? Are you picking up, deception? And when you listen to some of the other Bigfoot shows, are you able to discern whether or not some of these stories are truthful based on the witness facts, the way they tell the story, or other indicators?
Actually, I'm very opinionated about that. If somebody's on the witness stand, there are a number of things that have to be taken into account. Big deal is their demeanor. What do they look like? What are their eyes doing? Or, are they looking around? I remember on one occasion I had a small hearing, and we had a glass top table, and everyone was seated around this long conference table. And this woman was testifying, and every time she said something her husband didn't like, he'd kick her under the table. But he didn't realize it was glass. So I was watching every time he kicked her. I knew something was wrong with that. It was comical, but yes, the answer is yes. There are times when I listen and I say, oh man, this man is telling the truth. There is no doubt. The detail, how projectiles were thrown at him, the feeling that he had. And then there's a guy who is verbose. You can tell he likes to talk about himself a little bit. The details are lacking. And perhaps, and in one case, I don't want to say where it was because I just listened to it. I thought it was just, the guy was full of it. He just kept repeating how much he knew and how he knew this was correct. And it became more about him than anything else. I rejected it out of hand. And after 50 years, I got pretty good at it. But yeah, I kind of honed the skill to where if somebody's on the stand, or I was a lawyer for 50 years as well, and it's the same type of thing. In fact, it's even more fun because if somebody gets on the stand and he's lying, I had the opportunity to cross-examine him, and that's when you tear them apart.
That was kind of my question. Yeah, no. That was my question. Was as a judge, as part of your, I guess, adjudication of a case, can you take that into account, or do you have
Absolutely.
to just strictly? Oh, you can. Okay.
Nope. You take everything into account. The demeanor of a witness is so important, and you can reject evidence. If somebody could get on the stand and say, "I saw this, and it was this," and you can say, "No, I don't find him credible, and I reject his testimony." And I've had it happen to me, and it's not very fun. You shake your head and say, "Where do you get that, Judge?" But that's a gut feeling that he had. But yeah, absolutely.
It's
I get
interesting.
real strong feelings when I hear people on these podcasts telling about an event.
And I suppose that could go for the host as well.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In a number of cases, there's a lot of hosts out there that really trying to make a name for themselves as opposed to getting solid evidence out that people can rely on. Instead, it's them and their stories, and that's fine. People want to make a name, but I think the general public can see through that.
It's interesting about a witness's demeanor. That's something Rene DeHinden always told me. He said, it's best, of course, to record the witness, but it's best if you can video record them, because even many years later, people can, judge the veracity of that person's testimony based on their body posture and things like that.
That's very true. I think it's a major part of it. I've done trials that were telephonic, where we'd have a week's worth of trial because of the distance between the cities where I live here in Montana. People can't travel sometimes, and so we had telephonic hearings and trials, and the inability to see the person testify for me was a step down. It just wasn't quite where it should have been. So I committed to the electric chair and let it go.
All right, same guest. Tamik has a question, and that is, squeezing one more question. Will, still in touch with a friend from school that wrote the letter to Green and other gentlemen. I think his name is Jim.
Yeah, I haven't been in touch with Jim since we were in high school. I heard that he went to work for the IRS after high school, and that's all I know. But no, I haven't been in touch with him. Some of the guys, in fact, I've tried to reach out to a couple of the other guys that were part of our close-knit group, and haven't heard anything. So, I mean, people go their own way after high school and many years since then. So some of us have stayed in close contact, some haven't.
As you have said before, did DeHinden and Green eventually not get along? Did they have a separation of the ways?
By the time I met them in 1975 for the first time, they were already on the outs. In fact, in their camp, they shared a camp, but there were a number of other individuals there as well. They didn't talk to each other then.
Wow.
Although they would, on occasion, talk on the phone, but it was for very specific things and not very cordially, from what I understand.
What was the basis for their disagreement or their falling out?
It was a very important one, actually, going back to the 60s when they were doing all their work in Bluff Creek and taking all those, many, many, many pictures of footprints and talking to witnesses and all that. When John Green published his books, starting in 1968 through 73, and then there was another one later, many of the footprint photographs you see in those books were Rene DeHinden's photographs. And if you look at the early copies, because there were many editions put out, especially of On the Track of the Sasquatch, Green's first book, there was no notation whatsoever about who took those photographs. What Rene told me was there was a time when he and Green were down there, excuse me, and Green was taking color photographs, and he told DeHinden to take black and white photos. That's why when you look in those books, it's not just a printing issue, because Green printed all these books himself. Cheam Publishing was just a little building alongside of the road there's a highway that parallels the Fraser River heading towards Harrison Hot Springs. And there's a little bend along the road, and there was one building, and it was pointed out to me that was Cheam Publishing. So it was something that Green owned. He published his own books. Had he wanted to use color photographs, he could have done that. But supposedly, John Green told DeHinden that his nephew happened to be taking a nap in the room where all of this film supposedly was, and according to the story, at some point he got up and he pulled the film out of the rolls. And for anybody who's familiar with the old film technology, exposing that before development. You destroy all the film, you destroy the negatives. So they knew the archaeologist in the local area by the name of Don Abbott, and whenever they would come back from one of these trips, they would go to his office and give him copies of the photographs of footprints. And that's what DeHinden did. Then DeHinden leaves, and the story has it that Green went there after DeHinden, got copies of the photographs of DeHinden's photographs, and then used those in his book. And he initially didn't give Rene even credit, let alone monetary compensation for the use of those photographs, and that's what started the rift between the two of them. Eventually, he did give Rene credit, but he never paid him any. And Green made millions of dollars with those books, literally. So, Rene was a little ticked off about that.
I'm surprised that there was that much money to be made back then on books.
Well, not just books. Well, Green went around and distributed himself personally. He'd drive up and down the coast in his VW van, and he would sell them here and there. And I was told this by one of the ladies who used to run the Willow Creek Museum, the China Flat Museum in Willow Creek, rather. She said, Green made millions of dollars. I don't know how much, but certainly over $1 million on his books. But if you look at the time, even the Legend of Boggy Creek film, that film made $22 million. So back then there was money in it. Today, not so much, obviously, but there at that time there was money in it.
And Rene felt a little bit miffed that he got stiffed out of the money.
Yeah, and you have to look at, people think, there's, M.K. Davis, some other people come out with these crazy theories that Rene worked for the Canadian government and all this stuff. He didn't. I been to Rene's home many times. He lived in two cobbled together trailer houses, single wide trailers that were cobbled together. And then he lived and slept in it was a contractor's office that he picked up, for cheap. He lived at the Vancouver Gun Club in Richmond, British Columbia. And to earn his keep there, he would do chores around the place, and he would actually mine the peat bog from the shotguns when they shoot skeet. And he built a machine that would sift out, the peat bog from the shot, and he would sell that back to the gun club in 55-gallon drums for $600 a barrel. And that's how he would work all year long to pay for his 2-week trip to Bluff Creek. He bought an old bread truck and made a motorhome out of it. Even had a wood stove in it. He said, wherever I go, I have fuel. So, he didn't, and he owned the still rights to the Patterson film. Roger Patterson gave him 60% rights to it. And then he eventually got the other 40% from Mrs. Patterson. She retained the film rights. When somebody would sell, and we're talking, 60s or 70s and 80s, when somebody would use the famous frame or any of the frames, they'd have to purchase the rights from Rene at $600 per photograph. And Mrs. Patterson made $2,500, the same kind of a deal for film rights. So there wasn't a lot of money. Rene didn't have a lot of money. He wore the same clothes for many years that I remember. So he didn't have a lot. So when he didn't get, rights that should have been him, Green made money on it. Rene got nothing, and that caused a lot of friction between the two of them.
Well, I can imagine. Yeah,
but it was never a dispute over the nature of the creature or anything that had to do with the Sasquatch. It was just a monetary form.
That was initially, and then of course things that Green would say publicly later. Rene would, he was a taskmaster when it came to facts. There had to be facts, and they had to be supported to make any conclusions. And sometimes Green would say things, and I don't recall details at the moment, but he would say things and Rene would publicly go after him for. So, and anybody else also. Of course, you have to remember, Green was a journalist, and that was his angle. He was writing about the creatures, where Renee was the field guy.
Fine. Oh.
Wow. All right. So we got another question here. We got a gentleman named Dale. Dale's he's been hiking and camping for over 50 years. He's never had an encounter, but he still falls under the side that there's got to be something out there. There's just too much evidence. And go back to John Green for a second. I like one of his quotes, and he said, something's got to be making those footprints. So we agree with that. But Dale's got a question here. He said, what confuses him more than anything is that someone may find one or two footprints that are just out in the woods by themselves or in the field, and then they just disappear. So in other words, we've heard those stories where you've got some footprints going along, and then this thing, my gosh, did the UFO come along and beam it up? What's the deal with that?
Well, it's very possible they're climbing trees. Any place where there's been a line of tracks and a long line of tracks, they weren't hiding them. There were thousands of prints in those lines. But places where usually these kind of situations happen, it could be they're going up in trees.
And exactly. I have heard that they moved through the tops of those trees as easily as a chimpanzee. And they could travel through those forests without leaving any tracks at all.
It's certainly possible, sure.
And there's another thing to consider, and that is, without going into too much detail, how these things travel. They don't always travel in a straight line.
No.
And I know some of the tracks that I've seen, they meander, and also you want to think about the ground condition, the soil condition.
Yes.
It's not always consistent. It could be that they were walking around and they happened to be in a spot that was conducive to making footprints, and then they're right back into the, compacted soil, or, there's just so many variables. Maybe they got into an area where they had footprints, but it was unprotected. Rain, snow came along and, changed the soil conditions or washed it away. There's just a lot of different things. But I tend to think that they go from soft to hard ground or something like that.
And I can tell you, my brother-in-law found prints near a little town called South Prairie in Washington back in 2005. And when he and I went there were indeed 14-inch tracks, very good. I mean, they're very similar to the Patterson tracks, in fact. But when I tracked them, very quickly you lose a trail. So what I would do is go into one of a number of search patterns in the area. Eventually, I counted over 100 tracks. But if anybody, the casual person going out finding the tracks, they'd see a few prints and think exactly that. Well, they just vanished. Well, they didn't just vanish, because they went into that meandering all over the place. And again, like you're correct, Tom, looking at the ground conditions, some places were conducive for prints, other places weren't. But also doing that I did sort of a circular pattern, starting where I lost the prints, going outward, covering a large area, and I was able to locate many other prints in that area. And because of that meandering and ground condition, it wasn't just one or two or three tracks. There were 100 plus tracks there.
In deference to the question, however, and I'm kind of out there more than you are, Will, there are accounts that discount the soil and these other things where tracks have literally just disappeared. And good Indian trackers have followed these things, and boom, no more tracks. There's obviously kind of a woo-woo aspect to that, and it could be total hogwash, but I don't want to discount the question, because it has happened.
Well, there has to be mundane, and we don't have all the details of those accounts. It's whatever the witnesses tell us.
That's true.
So without actually being on that location, like I said, when we looked at those tracks in 2005, you could have said exactly that with that situation. However, it took a lot more digging, which I do when I'm in the field, and I did find many dozens more tracks. They didn't just vanish.
You know, and I want to support that, Will.
I'd like the tree theory as well.
Yeah, you have to look for mundane explanations. They don't just vanish. It isn't this woo-woo stuff. That's nonsense. There has to be an explanation, so you have to look harder for those answers. You have to do a tougher investigation. And many of the people out there in the subject simply don't dig farther. They go to the easiest, the path of least resistance, which is usually a nonsensical explanation.
Oh, you're hurting my feelings, Will.
I don't mean to. I'm just going to be a little going to be like DeHinden. I'm going to be a little tougher on these things.
That's okay.
But I'm going to jump in here for a second. I'm going to ditto that, Will, because you remember last summer I sent you pictures. I sent it to you and I sent it to Dalton of a tree stump that had just been shredded, and I was like, no, that was not a bear. It was not a bear. If you can't remember anything else, it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't an elk. And I sent it to you, and I sent it to Dalton, and independently. You know, neither one of you knew I'd sent it to the other one, and you both came back and said pretty much the same thing, that was, look at that. You could see the fingernails, giant fingernails, had peeled the bark off. And you had said, Tom, you need to go back there and diligently search the ground, look around. And that's when I went back,
do a search pattern,
and did exactly that.
And
I did a search pattern within 60 seconds. I found the first track, and then my buddy and I, we just found one after another, and they were doing that meandering thing. And I'm going back to that. The ground conditions were same forest, same area, same everything. Some of the ground conditions were very conducive to making tracks, and then they did disappear, and it was no mystery because the ground was, if you took an iron rod and tried to shove it in the ground, it wouldn't have hardly made a dent in it.
And this kind of stuff it's what prompted me to write Bigfoot Fieldwork 101, because I see this stuff over and over and over again with people, making these bizarre claims that they just vanish, and with some crazy explanation. And I thought back to all the years when we'd find prints, and sometimes you only find a few. And I would think to myself, well, now wait a minute. If these are legitimate, there has to be more. There has to be more. So I learned the ways to dig deep and to do these search patterns. In one of the chapters, I cover that. The search patterns you implement. Sometimes you have to look at the bigger picture, which means getting out there and plodding through the brush and looking closer at the ground in these areas, and you will find more.
That's exactly right. And if you remember, it was probably a month and a half, 2 months after that, my buddy and I went up, we're 60 miles northeast of that area, to an area that, removed from there. And we found tracks there as well. And it was kind of the same thing. We found one really, really good track, and then there was a line, but they disappeared. Well, they disappeared. It was no mystery. The ground was just rocky, and it's like, I think it's 28 degrees outside. But yeah, there was no mystery at all. And they were coming from a natural spring in the ground, going towards a road. They would have crossed the road and gone to a creek on the other side of the road.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll do weird things, like you follow the line of tracks to the road, and they may double back, come back the other way when you're thinking they're going to continue on that direction, and they don't. They reverse and go some other direction. So you have to be cognizant of those things as well. There's some strange things, but you could look at the reverse also. You'd say, well, what if they were faked? Well, and then you have to look for evidence of human activity in the area. Now, we leave markings all over the place. We're not very good at hiding our stuff unless we're, in the military and are really well trained at doing that. So for the average person to be out there hoaxing tracks, number one, how did they hoax something? I have yet to see a good example of that. People will say, oh, no, there's all kinds of examples, wooden feet, blah, blah, blah. That's all nonsense. I want to see somebody actually do it and fool somebody. To my knowledge, it hasn't happened yet. And people might say, well, what about Ray Wallace? Ray Wallace had wooden feet. I've seen him in person, these wooden feet. They don't match anything that come out of Bluff Creek. So I'm not convinced about hoaxing yet.
Well, again, I want to go back to, just real quick, I want to go back to these things suddenly vanishing. There's a guy, he's actually from British Columbia, Thomas, I can't remember his last name, but he did a seminar in Lacey, Washington last year. And he told a story about a witness who it was in the evening or at nighttime, one of these things had come down an embankment, crossed the road, went to the other side of the road, and suddenly vanished. Oh my gosh, it just disappeared right before her very eyes. So he went there the next day, found the footprints. Okay, yeah, went across the road. I'll be darned. Right there on the other side of the road where it vanished was like a 9-foot ravine, a ditch.
So it jumped the ravine.
It had gone across. It just went into the ravine. Yeah, it was like right there. So yeah, went across the road. Of course, it disappeared.
Right.
And think about it. Your light sources, your headlights, and you're kind of in a little bit of a state of shock. It went into the ravine, and I don't remember for sure, but I believe it had gone through the ravine. It basically went perpendicular to the original direction of travel, and then off into the woods.
Yeah, nothing mysterious
no mystery.
about that. And I did some experiments years ago with light and sound. Animals out in the wild aren't so much bothered by sound that people are making, the vehicles, things like that. It's the lights. I rigged up my old Blazer with toggle switches on all the lights in the vehicles and did an experiment, took the top off, and I was able to drive very slowly. In fact, in the area where I had my second sighting in 1988, that very same road, when you creep along just a couple miles an hour, there was enough light I could see the road pretty well, and then I'd stop and turn the lights on. All kinds of animals on the road. But if you drive through that area with your headlights, you see nothing.
That's interesting. I read an article a while back. If you're driving down the road and you got a cat or a dog or a deer, any kind of an animal on the road, our instinct is to hit the horn to get it to move. But they can't determine the direction of the sound. So it actually makes them freeze while they try to figure out what's going on, and then you just hit the animal, or you might. Yeah. The better way to deal with that situation, they said, always is to flash your flashers, flash your headlights. They can see that, boom, they're gone.
Animals are very keenly aware of light, so that's what triggers them to move. So, yeah, exactly. So, in that case, there was probably a situation with light. The animal vanished very quickly. Had it been daylight, it might have been a completely different situation. They would have seen more, would have seen it drop down into the ravine.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes these things
and I can imagine
weird positions. Like we talked to the lady, I won't give her identity or job away, but she is in an official position, saw one, and the thing was actually in the middle of the road, but it was down on all fours, kind of with its butt sticking up. And when it saw her headlights, it stood up. She saw it highlighted against the background, the light, because it was kind of getting dark. It was at dusk. And she saw clearly what it was, and it took a couple steps across the road and vanished. So they can drop down into those weird positions extremely fast. And we see that with other primates as well. When they're doing things, they can drop down and virtually vanish.
That's an interesting, I hadn't thought about that. So this one that ran across the road, when it hit that, because of ravine, just like a 9-foot drainage ditch or whatever, sure, it could have just got down on all fours,
Could have just dropped and vanished.
Sure, and think about the speed at which these things move.
Yeah, they're not
zips across the road.
They're not disappearing into thin air. They're doing something that makes them out of line of sight of the person.
Let me ask you about tree structures for a minute, Will. When I first got up here, I'm at about 6,000 feet, and I have 11,000, 12,000 foot mountains around me. Probably not 12, but 10 to 11. And I was up in those mountains, and I started seeing, I'm going to say 3 to 4 inch diameter saplings, maybe 20 foot high, very skinny, bent completely over in an arc with the tip buried in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I was with a friend who is a biology teacher, and just for kicks, I said, "Take a look at that, George. What do you think did that?" And he goes, "Snow."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "You sure? You sure snow can collect on something as skinny as that tree and break it down?" And he didn't answer, and he looked a little uncomfortable. What's your opinion on that? Have you seen snow load bring down something as slim as that and bury it?
It's possible, sure. I mean, for these things to be attributed to the Sasquatch, there has to be, in my opinion, has to be direct proof showing that. I have yet to see anything like that. Some of my native friends in Canada have found things very rudimentary kind of structures, not these elaborate things you see all over Facebook, that they thought was some sort of a marking, a directional marking or something along those lines that these things may have done. What we see are the territorial markings, and that was also confirmed by some of my native friends. So, but as far as these structures, number one, there has to be a purpose. These things don't waste their time for nothing. Some of my contacts say that occasionally they'll do something like that, but they won't leave it there very long. In other words, they're not going to leave things just there indefinitely, especially for people to find.
Now, when you talk about territorial markers, you're talking about breaks?
Yes.
Anything else?
Typically just the breaks. Breaks and
And
twists.
does the direction of the break mean anything? I've heard individuals say that if there's a break that goes across the trail, it's a sign that they don't want you there. I've heard other people say if it's a break that goes the other way, it means to follow it that way. Do you have any information on that or feelings?
I think a lot of that's just opinion. Again, when we're looking at stuff like that, I look at stuff, it has to be supported in some way or other. I haven't seen any supporting evidence for that stuff yet, so that's yet. I'm waiting to see.
What kind of evidence would you use to support that?
Well, if you're going to find something laid across the trail, then there's got to be footprints of something that did that, especially an animal this heavy.
You're looking for something substantive. All right.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm not going to go with just opinion or gut feeling. I want to see some supporting evidence. I've gone through many places and had things fall down behind the vehicle where I come back, and it wasn't surprising because that happens in the forest. I mean, I've been out in the forest since I was a very small boy, 4 years old, so I've seen a lot of things, and there's a lot of that stuff doesn't surprise me. So when I started finding those snapped and twisted trees, I went back to what Bob Titmus told me that he saw, while tracking Sasquatches. Of course, it was nowhere near the scale of what I was finding, and there was absolutely no other explanation for those things. So, when you grab a tree and it's wrung out like a wet cloth, a bear doesn't do that, the wind doesn't do that, especially where there is no wind. So I mean, there's in the area where there's a lot of Bigfoot activity, we find scat tracks, things like that. So, yeah, those are supporting pieces of evidence in those cases.
Well, let's say that you saw a twist or you saw a snap. What other corroborative evidence do you look for to render your opinion that that is a Sasquatch-based event?
Well, the two...
Just the twist, just the fact that it's high and no person could twist it, or do you look for something additional?
Well, you're looking for tracks. You're looking to see if there's hair on the bark, and oftentimes there is. Nail marks, things like that. If there are claw marks and stuff like that, that's a bear. But it's pretty clearly, you have to understand what different animals do. So after you've seen this a few times, then for me now it's pretty easily recognizable.
Okay.
Listen, fellas, do we have any more questions? We're kind of out of time.
Will, I just have
I'm good.
one.
Go ahead, Tom.
You and I talked yesterday, and you had a real interesting story, and I just wonder if you could retell it about you. I think it was around Orleans. You were driving along, and I think you came back on the same road. And if you could tell that one, that was an interesting story.
When you're in the Bluff Creek area, if you're going to work that area, you have to go in on Highway 96. I mean, you can go in from the north, but it's a long way through a lot of forest, and you better take a lot of maps with you. So if you're going to go that area, you drive along the Klamath River, and you go several times a day, if you're, depending on what you're doing in that area, along Highway 96 that parallels the Klamath River. So my brother-in-law and I think we were either coming from Orleans. There's a little restaurant there that's kind of the only game in town for a long ways. So you eat there when you're working that area. And we were either coming from there or going to that place. And we came around a slight bend in the road, and there was this enormous pile of scat on the side of on the paved road, a couple of feet from the white. There isn't a white line on that side of the road, but where the pavement ends and the gravel shoulder is. So we pulled over immediately, and I'm telling you, it has to be the biggest pile of scat I've ever seen. There were literally a couple of gallons or more of what would have looked like blackberries or some type of berry with seeds. And in that area, there's a lot of that, especially some of the farms and things. They have fruit trees and berries and things. And the parts that weren't liquid were the segments. Were literally 4 inches across. It was the biggest scat, and there is no bear in that area that's going to produce something of that size. And especially given the history of that area with these creatures. So my brother-in-law looked at it and he says, "Holy cow! If somebody come along and hit that, they'd have skidded off in the Klamath River and been killed." But it was that impressive. And it was fresh because we'd made many trips through that area the night before and that morning and hadn't seen it. So on this particular drive through that location, this had been done within a couple hours of our coming there.
And it was all berries.
That's what I found interesting.
It was all berries, yeah. Or at least it looked like. I mean, I didn't go picking it apart, obviously, that particular one. It was just so impressive that... one of these things had come through and had eaten a lot of berries.
Huh. You see that with bears a lot. It's pretty distinctive.
You do, but this was not bear scat. I can tell you that. Not with a diameter or the scat, the segment being 4 inches across.
Yeah, that's insane.
And we it's in an area close enough to where we do find a lot of Sasquatch scat during one particular time of the year. And it's also very obvious because of the sheer amount and size. I was telling Tom, I said I collected up one sample at one time. The segments were the size of Coke cans in diameter. And again, there's no bear in that area that's going to produce something that size. And the sheer volume was incredible.
Well, to all the listeners, enjoy your lunch out there.
All right, fellas, listen, I think we'll close on that note. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out